how did the idea of like going on this trip happen? Like how did you get in?
Richie.
Did a bike ride from San Francisco, California to Encinitas, California. Rode our bicycles.
Well, San Diego to, he said San Diego to San Francisco, but I wasn't ready for that.
Some of the dudes that went on the trip, we had Dan and Chris and Weston. They all three live in Encinitas.
Yeah, cause you'd hit me up after I'd post a photo of like a 50-mile bike ride that me and a couple friends did, and after that I was like, well, I'll ask my friend Dan and Chris, you know, if they'd be down, but I didn't really think they would be just because they have real jobs.
Speaking to Weston, he brought up that Rich, who I met on this trip, had been interested in doing San Francisco to San Diego.
Weston told me that he had a friend in Kansas City who really wanted to do that ride too. So we were talking about it for a little bit and we kind of decided like, all right, let's do it this summer.
I had to go pick up a bike off Craigslist, haggle with them because of budget, and luckily the dude, like, the shifter wasn't working on the bike, so, and this dude, he didn't know anything about bikes, so he's like, no, it's just the shifter cable, and he's like, I'll fix that, tighten it, and then he's like, it's just a shifter. I'm like, no, you don't want to undo that, and he undoes the shifter, like, all the springs and everything pops out, and he knew I was going to get the bike for cheaper then.
I didn't have a bike going into this thing, so I was scrambling on Craigslist to try to find a bike, and I didn't want to just buy anything I could find. I wanted to buy something that was gonna, you know, last the struggles of the trip and was gonna be a comfort and good ride for me.
So I'd send him all these bikes, and he'd be like, yeah, it's pretty sick. I'm like, go look at it. He's like, no. And I was like, okay. It just kept getting closer and closer to the date.
But Weston found me this old Cannondale that I bought about 2 weeks before the trip started.
So leading up to this trip, we never really came up with a plan on how to get up to San Francisco.
I'm just trying to figure out the cheapest route and the fastest route.
The logistics of that ended up being pretty stressful, to the point where the week before, Weston was like, well, let's just rent a car. It's about the same price to rent an SUV and drive up.
Yeah, driving would have been like at least probably like a couple hundred cheaper.
Eventually figured out that we could pack our bikes into boxes check them here in the San Diego area and pick them up in San Francisco.
In my head, I was just like, okay, I gotta save money.
What we ended up doing was making a decision that we should convince Weston that it was a better idea, even though it was less cost effective, to take the train, because that would be part of the adventure.
Chris wanted to take the train for the experience, and it ended up, it was awesome taking the train, so I was fine with it.
So the night before we left, I finished putting together the bike and packed out all the gear and never even rode it before.
My journey started on June 1st when I left. I had to take a flight out of Kansas City it was like 9 or 10 a.m. on June 1st, and then I had a connecting flight in Minneapolis. Then it was about 3.5 hours from Minneapolis to San Francisco, maybe 4. It was just like breathtaking to see all this scenery and kind of get a tour of America almost in like one plane ride.
So we're able to use Weston's girlfriend Taylor, put on this janky ass fucking bike carrier, and we put 3 steel frame heavy ass bikes onto the back of her little Honda, which proceeded to bounce down the road. So in pure fear that our bikes were going to go flying off the back of this thing.
Saturday we took the train up the coast to San Francisco, and once I got my bike together and everything packed, it started to relax and just really enjoy that train ride, and that was a pretty awesome start to the trip.
I thought I would sleep because I only slept like 3 hours the night before.
We find out that there's this thing called a lounge car where you go and the seats kind of point out and look at everything that's going by, and they have these skylights. There's just shitloads of windows, which is awesome.
There were some these old people from the parks department, and they would tell us all this knowledge that they knew or thought they knew, but it was all believable.
We went into this thing pretty dry, not knowing, just expecting like, well, we'll just get to see a bunch of shit. But we got to experience these things in 2 levels. One, it was like, oh, look at that thing, and wanting to just reach out and touch it. And then on the way back down, being able to literally reach out and touch it and see it and experience it. And we spoke to a lot of people on the train. One guy in particular used to ride mountain bikes a lot when he was a kid, or not a kid, but a younger man. He's an older man now. And his wife had done this particular ride as part of the AIDS life cycle, which became the bane of my existence personally.
Some guy said on the train ride up there, he was like, yeah, my wife did the AIDS ride and she got shot.
As we're doing this very long ride and realizing how fucking long this thing is gonna be, this guy's telling us like, oh yeah, my wife did it. And there was a guy whose fucking tank got so rashed out that he had to cut the fucking centers of his pants out. He's telling us all this crazy shit, so.
Dang, San Francisco's pretty bad now. There's people shooting the AIDS riders.
Jump on a bus from Oakland and we're watching them take our bikes or take these boxes, and they're like dropping them and shit. We're like, oh fuck, here we go. They just dropped it directly on the forks.
Then we got into Oakland that night, took a bus over to San Francisco, took the BART down to South San Francisco.
We get to the ferry station in San Francisco, and everything's all right. Except for Dan hasn't fully assembled his bike yet. So within 10 feet, we have to then finish building bikes. Actually, Weston had to steal parts off of a bicycle that was already stripped down. He didn't steal off of like somebody else's, but it's just one of those bicycles you see in the city that is like completely stripped down. Weston went and stole some parts off.
Got a hotel that was kind of close to the airport. Got some sleep there in a nice hotel bed and stuff. Woke up the next morning and just had a lot of time to kill in San Francisco before we met up with him, with Richie getting off the plane.
A lot of things happened in the first 24 hours that continued to be themes
Chris, he had his phone, which was fine. So we were just gonna take his phone, and so Chris gets it in on the phone, and he has the phone bungeed to the front bag, and he's looking like right off the bat. He like hits a bump. We rode like a mile or something. He hits a bump, and the phone flies out, and I'm like, oh gosh. He has an iPhone, so luckily it didn't break somehow.
Yeah, we got fucking shit lost trying to ride an SFO. It's a huge international airport that's supplies one of the larger cities in the country, and it's built to drive a car into, not ride a bicycle. So, but we did. Fuck it, you know, we rode bicycles in, and we got there, and we walked our bicycles into this massive building, and we were still pretty far away from where we actually needed to be, so we had one way and got lost, and then had another way and got lost, and then eventually, after, you know, an hour or so, we found our way.
And then there were like no bikes past a certain point, so we were like riding through the airport. We get our bikes in the airport, and then we're riding through the airport, because if we didn't, we would have to like do this huge loop around the entire airport and try to get on these roads that we're not even supposed to be biking on.
So I get to San Francisco, and I get there like, I guess before the guys, because as soon as I got off the flight, I called Weston, but he wasn't answering, so I just assumed, oh, they're probably just trying to find like my gate, because I don't know what it's like to ride a bike around a huge airport like San Francisco. Finally, Weston calls me, he's like, dude, we just made your baggage claim, like, where are you? I'm like, oh, I'm like 3 floors up, I'll be right down there.
We found Richie and put his bike together as fast as humanly possible.
We're just like barging it, like basically Weston and I gave me my whole bike like a tune-up, which was needed forever because I suck at tuning my bike.